There are moments in history when the world thinks it knows the story, when it assumes the script is already written. But then, without warning, a nation rises from the shadows with a move so sharp, so unexpected, that it changes the entire game. This isn't about noise. This is about silence turning into strength, about patience exploding into power. And in that moment, the world doesn't just watch, it holds its breath. Let me tell you something right from the very start. At a time when the world wasn't watching closely, when attention was drawn somewhere else, India made a step so bold, so clever, and so carefully thought out that it did more than just catch glances. It spun heads completely around. This was not just another piece of passing news. It was a real turning point in the global direction. And it didn't just raise a few questions in Washington or Beijing. It shook rooms in London, sparked new debates in Brussels, and even made countries that usually stay silent stop for a moment and reconsider their views. The smartest players in the world rarely make noise when they act. They move quietly, strategically. And India moved like a master chess player. One hand relaxed, calm and confident, and still it managed to corner the king with a smile that seemed to say, "You never even saw it coming." Now think about it. How many times has India been underestimated? How often has the world looked only at its poverty and written it off as underdeveloped? How many times have they pointed at the chaos, misunderstood the beauty of hundreds of languages and cultures existing together, and wrongly judged the heart of 1 billion people dreaming with one vision? They thought India would remain trapped in its contradictions. They said caste would break it, borders would weaken it, religions would split it apart. They believed India would always be too distracted with its own issues to ever step forward as a real global power. But while others laughed, India listened. While they dismissed, India advanced. While they criticized, India reflected. And while they mocked, India transformed. Because when your eyes are stuck in the wrong direction, you miss the real story that is unfolding somewhere else. That's exactly what happened here. Amid all the drama of world politics, while Western nations were tangled in wars, sanctions, and the weight of economic trouble, India silently made a move that was not designed to create collapse, but to demand recognition. It wasn't loud, but it was exact. It forced everyone to realize they were not just looking at another country trying to join the discussion. They were looking at a rising force. The effect was huge not because India lacked strength before, but because people never believed India had the resolve to project it. But courage has always been stitched into India's fabric, long before many of today's nations were even formed. And this action was not random or emotional. It was not rushed diplomacy. It was the outcome of long years of planning meeting the right moment. It was what happens when patience meets opportunity, when determination turns unshakable. India wasn't chasing attention. It was waiting for the right time. And when that moment came, India didn't just enter the stage. It took control of it like it had been preparing all along, because it had. Let me make it clearer. While America played global policeman, enforcing sanctions, stepping into conflicts, and struggling with its own divisions, and while China built partnerships through heavy debt disguised as assistance, India was preparing something far deeper. It was building relationships not out of short-term profit, but out of real shared trust and respect. Trade routes based on equal need. Security cooperation built on balance. Space projects driven by pure innovation. India wasn't just making deals, it was writing the design for a new kind of world order. Silently, carefully, steadily. And the strength of this was that India never needed to shout about it. It didn't brag because India understood a truth most of today's world ignores. Real power doesn't scream. It doesn't rely on trending posts or applause. Real power is built quietly, out of the spotlight, and that's why it lasts. India didn't try to compete with the West dollar for dollar or gun for gun. It put its focus on the real wealth of this century: influence, knowledge, technology, human talent, culture, independence, and control of data. It invested in its thinkers. It supported its scientists. It encouraged its entrepreneurs. It poured resources into defense research. It gave opportunities to engineers, innovators, and creators. And suddenly, the results were everywhere. The heads of the world's top technology companies were Indians. Google, Microsoft, Adobe, IBM. The list kept growing. Was it coincidence? No. That was the fruit of long-term investment meeting a global shift. That was a nation refusing to beg for space, and instead creating its own. India didn't just enter the conversation, it started to shape it. It didn't just follow the rules, it began to write them. Countries that once called India unstable started describing it as a steadying influence. Nations that were once hesitant to transfer sensitive technology now wanted India as a partner. Corporations that had once used India only for cheap labor now looked to it as a hub of invention. The old narrative no longer applied. A new reality took over. India as a force that cannot be ignored. And this India didn't roar for attention. It commanded respect by standing prepared and steady. Now, take the military side. For years, people saw India as defensive, responding rather than acting. But behind the curtain, a deep transformation was taking place. The BrahMos missile, locally developed fighter jets, new drone systems, aircraft carriers built in Indian yards, submarines, anti-satellite systems, all these signaled change. The biggest shift was that India was no longer just buying from others. It was producing, and more importantly, exporting to the same countries that once refused to even share technology. That is not only smart strategy, it is poetic justice. That is power rewriting its own script. Another bold step was India's decision to stop chasing approval from the West, no longer waiting for validation from prestigious universities, think tanks, or global media. India stopped apologizing for being complex. It rejected labels that served no purpose for its people. It called out the double standards in global coverage. It started seeing itself through its own lens. And once it did that, it stopped asking for a chair at someone else's table. It built its own. And once you do that, you don't worry about who sits where. You host your own gathering. While Europe struggled with energy shortages and America tried to play its game with oil producers, India redrew the energy map. It signed oil deals with countries others avoided. It widened its supply sources, paid less, and stabilized its economy. That was more than clever economics. That was self-respect in action. That was sovereignty expressed through strategy. And space, yes, let's talk about that. While big nations poured billions into missions to the moon, India managed it at a fraction of the cost. Chandrayaan was more than just a lunar mission. It was a statement. India doesn't need extravagance to leave a legacy. It showed science blended with discipline. And when it succeeded, it proved not only ability, but creativity. It didn't say India might, it declared India will in its own way. But if you look carefully, you'll see that this wasn't some sudden action. This was decades in the making. Years of being underestimated turned into fuel to perform better. This is not the India of the 1990s asking for help from the IMF. This isn't the India of the early 2000s waiting for approval. This is the tiger, steady, sharp, awake, and finally free. And when the tiger rises, the whole forest pays attention. With strength in its spine, hunger in its heart, and focus in its mind. This India isn't reacting to the world anymore. It's forcing the world to react to it. Look at the board of global politics today. The United States no longer views India as just a secondary partner. It sees India as essential in balancing China's growing power. Russia works with India not just because of history, but to maintain stability. The Middle East seeks India not out of ideology, but because of its neutrality, its balanced diplomacy, and its rising economic weight. Europe looks at India as a vital market. Africa considers India a partner in progress that does not exploit but empowers. Southeast Asia does not see India as a danger but as a cultural relative. This is more than just influence. This is a natural pull, a magnetic force. This is what happens when a nation refuses to move according to another's tune and instead creates its own beat. And that beat is not about control, but about respect and dignity. India's power comes from what was once called its weaknesses, its complexity, contradictions, and seeming disorder. But those are not flaws, they are hidden strengths. Where others see confusion, India sees different layers. Where the world hears noise, India hears music. Where others find chaos, India finds a pattern of meaning. Only a civilization that has survived through this kind of depth can design systems that last through time. Only a country born in diversity can practice diplomacy in a world broken into narrow chambers. India did not erase its identity to get approval. It celebrated it, and today that same cultural identity is becoming a global offering. Bollywood is not only films anymore, it is soft power. Yoga is not only exercise, it is a philosophy that attracts millions, reshaping the idea of wellness and presenting India as a spiritual guide for the world. Ayurveda pushes the idea of health beyond clinics and medicines. Indian food, clothing, traditions, and design are not only exports anymore, they are influence. In a global space tired of endless materialism, India's timeless wisdom is appearing as the missing piece. India's rise is also about mindset. It is moving from apology to confidence, from hesitation to leadership, from absorbing stories to writing them. The India that once waited for IMF approval and Western applause now writes its own economic path. Systems like UPI, Aadhaar, and Jan Dhan were not borrowed. They were created in India, for India, and now are studied worldwide as examples of new solutions. Imagine rural villages linked with real-time banking, telemedicine, online learning. That is not just progress, it is a shift of generations. While many developed countries still struggle with old systems, India quietly built a digital structure that supports more than 1 billion people. These achievements may not always make breaking news, but history will record them. India's diplomacy has matured into a rare mix of calm patience and steady firmness. It is not aggressive, yet it does not bend. It does not roar loudly, but it never retreats. When the West tried to push isolation on Russia, India did not blindly copy. It bought oil at discounts, controlled inflation, and stayed firm because it acted for its people, not for praise in foreign editorials. In global summits full of tension, India did not just speak words. It offered balance, reason, and clarity. It voted based on national interest, not borrowed slogans. And when needed, it simply said no, no to pressure, no to manipulation, no to being anyone's pawn. That refusal was not arrogance, it was wisdom. The wisdom that grows from decades of patient, careful growth. And the real turning point is this: India's rise has not come through conquest. It never invaded. It never enslaved. It never colonized. It never forced others. It rose through knowledge, creativity, and honesty. That is not only unusual, it is revolutionary. In the past, powers rose by destroying others. India is rising by building itself. That makes it not just strong, but inspirational, especially for the global South, which now sees India as a guide, not the West, not China, but India, a nation that rose without losing its soul. The old order survived on dependence, but India trusted self-reliance. Make in India was not only a slogan, it turned into a drive, from making mobile phones to fighter jets, from medicines to microchips. India is producing what it once imported and is doing it at world-class scale. That is why global companies are moving their factories to India. That is why supply chains are being redesigned around India, because India is reliable, it is resilient, It is rewriting what it means to be an emerging economy. While other nations struggle with high costs, aging societies, political divides, and lack of workers, India has something priceless. Its youth. More than half of its people are under 30. Inventors, engineers, thinkers, entrepreneurs, scientists. This is not just numbers, it is a living power. But do not confuse youth with immaturity, because this new generation does not want to leave India to succeed. It wants to succeed within India. Startups are growing, unicorns are rising, capital is pouring in, and importantly, it is not only foreign investment, it is local capital, local belief. This generation believes in Bharat. It does not see traditions as weight, it sees them as wings. It carries heritage with pride while coding in futuristic languages. It performs Bharatanatyam and builds AI companies in the same breath. This balance of the old and the new, that is the Indian advantage. On the global stage, India has also surprised many. It became the voice for those who had none. Vaccine Maitri was not just charity, it was compassion in action. When rich nations stored vaccines, India shared. When disasters struck, India did not send only words. It sent people and support. When countries needed help without judgment, India came forward. And that matters today more than ever. In a world tired of manipulation, India gives partnership. And its partnerships come without hidden strings. That is why India's presence echoes, because it is built not on dominance, but on dignity. Look now at how the world's media is changing its tune. For years, India was reduced to stereotypes: poverty, pollution, population. But now, even the toughest critics are adjusting their words because the facts are undeniable. You cannot dismiss a country creating billion-dollar companies almost every week. You cannot mock a nation that landed near the moon's south pole. You cannot overlook a democracy that survives with such unmatched diversity. The West, which once lectured India, now stops to listen. The East, which once challenged India, now works with it. The global South, once waiting, now sees India take the lead. This was not a trick of marketing, it was the outcome of consistent policy and effort, years of reform, building highways, railways, ports, digitizing identity, payments, schools, opening markets, trusting creators, betting on science, playing the patient game. The strongest player is often the one not rushing, because they do not panic, they plan. They do not shout, they act when the time is right. That is what India has done. And this wisdom was not copied from foreign books. It was drawn from centuries of civilizational depth. From the Vedas to Israel, from Upanishads to algorithms, from ancient temples to modern technology parks, India has always balanced what is physical with what is spiritual. That balance gives it an advantage across time, because when a nation knows who it is at the core, no storm can break it.